Mira's hands trembled as she pressed her ear against the cold metal door of the industrial freezer in the mansion's basement. At first, she thought she'd imagined it, a faint scratching sound barely audible over the hum of the refrigeration units. But then she heard it again. A whimper. A child's whimper. Her breath caught in her throat as she grabbed the heavy handle, her mind racing. No one was supposed to be down here. The basement storage was off limits to most of the staff, accessible only to the head housekeeper, and the handle wouldn't budge. Someone had locked it from the outside. "Hello?" Mira called out, her voice cracking. "Is someone in there?" The whimpering grew louder, more desperate. 2 voices now. 2 children. Mira's blood ran cold as she recognized those voices. She'd tucked those boys into bed countless times, read them stories, wiped their tears. Matteo and Nico Corsetti, the sons of the most powerful crime boss in New York, and someone had locked them in a freezer to die. What would you do if you discovered a terrible secret that could cost you your life? Mira is about to make a choice that will change everything. Keep watching to see how a maid with nothing left to lose becomes the only thing standing between 2 innocent children and a cold-blooded killer. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. 3 weeks earlier, Mira Santos was kneeling, wiping down the marble floor on the first level of the Corsetti villa, when the sound of high heels rang out behind her. She lifted her head and saw Mrs. Delgado standing there, the head housekeeper's face giving away nothing at all. Yet her eyes held something that made Mira uneasy. Mrs. Delgado said, "Up to my office. Right now." Only 4 words, but the way she delivered them told Mira this was not ordinary. Mira set the rag down, wiped her hands on her apron, and followed Mrs. Delgado through the long, hollow corridors. 6 months of working here had taught Mira how to read the air inside this villa. Every wall seemed to have ears. Every dark corner seemed to hide a secret. She was only one among dozens of servants, doing the kind of work no one noticed, and she preferred it that way. The more invisible you were, the safer you stayed. Mrs. Delgado's office sat at the end of the first-floor hallway, a small room with an oak desk and filing cabinets stacked with paperwork. Mrs. Delgado closed the door, and the click sounded like handcuffs locking tight. Mrs. Delgado spoke plainly. "You are being transferred to the 3rd floor. You will take care of Mr. Corsetti's 2 sons." Mira blinked. She said she did not understand, that she was only cleaning. Mrs. Delgado answered that now she was childcare. Mrs. Delgado sat down, her sigh heavy, as if she were carrying the entire villa on her shoulders. She said the previous nanny had quit. Mira had been chosen to replace her. Chosen, those 2 words landed like a sentence. Mira knew about Dominic Corsetti's 2 sons. Everyone here did. Matteo and Nico, 8 years old and 5 years old. Children no one wanted to get close to, not because they were bad, but because their father was the man all of New York feared. Mira asked why it had to be her, her voice dry in her throat. Mrs. Delgado looked at her for a long time. Then she said it was because Mira had no family here, no husband, no children, no one who would ask questions if she was not suitable. Not suitable. Mira understood the real meaning under those words. Slowly, she asked about the woman before her, whether she had quit or vanished. Mrs. Delgado's silence was an answer more terrifying than any spoken line. At last Mrs. Delgado stood, stepped closer, and lowered her voice as if the walls themselves were listening. She told Mira to keep her head down, keep her mouth shut, do her work, and that was the only way to survive in this house. She paused, and her old eyes softened just a little. She said the children were not bad, only lonely, but the world around them was more dangerous than anything Mira had ever known. Mira wanted to refuse. Every cell in her body was screaming at her to run, to resign, to find another job anywhere but this hell. But then she thought of Diego. Her younger brother lay in Mount Sinai Hospital, his 22-year-old body being eaten away day by leukemia. Chemotherapy was not cheap. Medicine was not cheap. Even hope had its price. This job paid 3 times what she earned cleaning the lower floors. 3 times meant Diego would have more time. Mira said she accepted, her voice steadier than she expected. Mrs. Delgado nodded, neither surprised nor disappointed. Perhaps she had known the answer before Mira ever stepped into the room. Mrs. Delgado said Mira's belongings would be moved to the room next to the children's, and that she would begin that very afternoon. Mira walked out of the office, her feet carrying her toward the staircase that led up to the 3rd floor. Each step felt like a reminder that she was leaving the ordinary world behind. The first floor was where servants like her existed in the shadows. The second floor held offices and meeting rooms, where deadly decisions were made. The third floor was the private territory of the Corsetti family, where one wrong move could make her vanish like the woman before her. When she reached the final step, Mira drew in a deep breath. She did not know that the decision she made today would change everything, in a way she could never have imagined. The heavy oak door swung open, and Mira stepped into a world that felt entirely different. If the rest of the Corsetti villa was cold as a tomb, with gray stone walls and dim corridors, then the family area on the third floor was unexpectedly warm. The walls were painted a gentle cream, and late afternoon sunlight streamed through the large windows, spreading across a thick, deep blue rug. Toys lay scattered on the floor. A red truck, a few building blocks, a picture book left open in the middle. Mira stood there for a moment, trying to reconcile this scene with what she knew about Dominic Corsetti, the infamous Mafia boss, the man whose name alone could make all of New York tremble, had created a space like this for his children. A voice rose from the corner of the room, and Mira startled, turning toward it. "You will leave too. Everyone leaves." A boy stepped out of the shadows beside the bookcase, small in stature, yet the way he held himself carried the guarded stance of an adult. Matteo Corsetti, 8 years old, but his gray eyes were frighteningly old, eyes that had seen far too much of what a child should never see, eyes that had learned not to trust anyone. He looked at Mira as if weighing a potential threat, not as if looking at a grown woman who had come to care for him. Mira said softly that her name was Mira, fighting to keep her voice steady even as her heart hammered. She told him she would be here with them starting today. Matteo answered with a chill that felt practiced, saying the one before her had said the same thing. Then she left. The one before that too, and the one before that. Before Mira could respond, a small blur shot out of the room next door and slammed into her legs. Mira looked down and saw a 5-year-old boy clinging tightly to her, his face tipped up, wide brown eyes brimming with hope. Nico Corsetti, Matteo's younger brother, one arm wrapped around Mira's leg, the other clutching a worn, threadbare stuffed dinosaur. He asked in a clear, bright voice if she was the new one. He asked if she would stay, because their father said they were bad, so no one stayed. Mira's heart tightened, as if someone had closed a fist around it. She looked from Nico, with his innocent, hopeful expression, to Matteo, with his cold, defensive eyes, and she understood. These two children were not bad. They were breaking in their own ways, one through a desperate hunger for love, the other by building a fortress around his heart. Mira knelt down, bringing herself to Nico's eye level, while still keeping Matteo in view. She told them to listen, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. She said she did not know what the others before her had told them, but she promised she would not leave. The promise slipped out before she had time to think, and it startled Mira herself. She had come here for money, for Diego, for survival. She had not intended to attach herself to anyone in this house, but looking into the eyes of those two children, she could not say anything else. Nico squealed, threw his arms around Mira's neck, and grinned. He told her to hear it. Matteo, Mira had promised. Mira looked toward Matteo, hoping to see even the slightest thaw in those gray eyes, and for a moment, she thought she did. The boy's shoulders sank just a fraction, and his gaze no longer cut like a knife. Then it returned, the invisible wall lifting back into place, more solid than before. Matteo said that their mother had promised the same thing, his voice flat as a frozen lake. Then he turned, walked into the bedroom, and shut the door, leaving Mira kneeling there with Nico in her arms, and a question drilling into her mind. Their mother, the woman who had promised, and then failed to keep her word. What had happened to her? Mira did not yet know how that single sentence was hiding a tragedy so horrifying. That afternoon, Mira was sitting on the floor with Nico, helping the little boy stack wooden blocks into a tower, while Matteo read by himself in the corner of the room. The last light of day had begun to fade, laying a warm orange veil across the space, and for the first time since she had set foot on the third floor, Mira felt her shoulders loosen. Nico giggled every time the tower climbed one more level, that clear, bright sound, like an unfamiliar melody inside this silent villa. Then the door opened. No knock, no warning, only the soft turn of hinges and a figure appearing in the doorway. Mira lifted her head, and her breath caught in her throat. Dominic Corsetti stood there like a statue carved from stone and shadow. He was taller than she had imagined, broad shoulders filling the frame, a powerful body hidden beneath a perfectly tailored black suit, His face was sharply angular, a square jaw, a straight nose, every line as if cut with a blade. But the most frightening thing was his eyes, steel gray, cold as an eternal winter, the eyes of a man who had looked at death countless times, who had acted without blinking, who had buried who knows how many secrets under the soil of New York. Mira sprang to her feet, survival instinct screaming in her mind to lower her gaze, to become invisible, to remember what Mrs. Delgado had warned her. But before she could do anything, Nico squealed and dashed toward the door. He shouted for his father. The 5-year-old ran across the room, the stuffed dinosaur swinging in his hand, and what happened next froze Mira in place. Dominic Corsetti, the most infamous Mafia boss in New York, the man whose stare alone could make people drop to their knees, bent down and lifted Nico with a gentleness that felt impossible. Hands that had once closed around an enemy's throat now held his son as carefully as if he were precious treasure. The face that looked like ice softened slightly as he kissed the boy's forehead. Dominic asked if he had been good, his voice low and warmer than Mira expected. Nico said he had been very good, and told him to look. He had built a tower so tall. Matteo did not run to him the way his brother did. The boy rose slowly, walked over with a calm far beyond his years. Dominic set a hand on his older son's head, fingers brushing lightly through the boy's black hair, and for a brief moment, Mira saw something in the man's eyes. Love, deep and fierce, the kind of love that could set the whole world on fire. Then those gray eyes shifted to her, and Mira felt stripped bare. Dominic's gaze swept over her from head to toe, not the way a man looks at a woman, but the way a predator measures prey, the way a commander studies a new soldier. She felt as if he could see through every secret she carried, from Diego in the hospital to the fear coiling in her stomach right now. Dominic said she was the new one. It was not a question. Mira answered yes, sir, and gave her name, Mira Santos. Dominic said he knew who she was. He set Nico down and stepped closer, and Mira had to fight the urge to step back. Dominic asked what Mrs. Delgado had told her. Mira said Mrs. Delgado had told her to keep her head down and keep her mouth shut. Sir, something flickered in Dominic's eyes, perhaps satisfaction, perhaps amusement. He said it was good advice, but not enough. He stopped right in front of her, so close that Mira could smell expensive cologne and something else beneath it. The scent of danger, the scent of power. Dominic said his sons needed stability. They had already lost enough. In this house, trying your best could be the line between living and dying. He asked if she understood. Mira said she understood. Sir, Dominic said good. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and drew out a black card. Nothing on it except a string of numbers embossed in silver. He placed it in Mira's hand. His fingers brushed her palm for a brief instant, cold and dry. Dominic told her that if anything happened to his sons, anything at all, she was to call him. Not Mrs. Delgado, not security, not anyone else. Him. 24 on 24. He asked if she understood. Mira said yes, sir. Dominic studied her a moment longer, as if carving her face into memory, then turned back to his sons. He kissed each boy on the forehead, said something in Italian that Mira did not understand, and left the room as quickly as he had come. The door closed, and Mira let out a breath, not realizing she had been holding it the whole time. She looked down at the card in her hand, her fingers trembling slightly. Beside her, Matteo's voice rose with calm certainty, as if he were talking about the weather. He said his father killed people. Mira turned to look at the boy, and he shrugged. He said his father only killed bad people. Uncle Marco said so. Mira did not know whether to believe it, or to be afraid. The first night in the small room beside the boys' room, Mira could not sleep. She lay on the unfamiliar bed, staring up at the ceiling in the dark, listening to the sounds of the villa. Wind whistling outside the window, pipes murmuring inside the walls, the steady footsteps of security making their rounds down in the courtyard. Everything felt foreign, and everything felt frightening. She thought of Diego, wondering if her younger brother was sleeping peacefully, or waking again with pain. She thought of the black card in her pocket, its silver numbers like a thin cord tying her to the most dangerous man in this city. She thought of Dominic Corsetti's cold gray eyes, and Matteo's gray eyes that looked far too old. Father and son so alike it made her shiver. Then she heard it. At first it was only a muffled moan, so quiet Mira thought she might have imagined it, but it grew louder, turning into a choked sob that pushed through the thin wall. Mira sat up, her heart pounding. The crying was coming from Matteo's room. She hurried out, eased his door open, and what she saw made her heart ache. Matteo was curled tight on the bed, The blanket kicked down to the floor, his small body trembling. Sweat slicked his forehead, soaking his black hair. His eyes were squeezed shut, yet tears still ran down his face, and from his pressed lips came broken, catching sounds of grief. "No, Mom, do not, do not." The boy was having a nightmare. Mira quickly sat on the edge of the bed, her hand resting gently on Mateo's shoulder. She told him to wake up, that it was only a dream, that he was safe now. The boy jolted awake, gray eyes flung wide in panic. For a moment he stared at Mira as if he did not know who she was, as if he were still trapped inside the nightmare. Then recognition came, and what hurt Mira most was how he immediately rebuilt the wall of defense. Mateo wiped his tears with the back of his hand and forced himself upright, his face stiff. He said he was fine, and told her to go back to her room. Mira told him he did not have to pretend to be strong with her. Everyone got afraid sometimes, even adults. He said he was not afraid, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Mira did not push. She simply sat there, quiet, patient, waiting. And then, in the darkness of the room, with only the dim nightlight washing the wall, Mateo began to speak. He said he had dreamed about his mother. His voice was as small as a whisper. He said he always dreamed about that night. Mira asked which night, though she already had a sense of the answer. Mateo said it was the night his mother died. He stared down at his hands, small fingers laced together, gripping hard. He said he had been there. He had seen everything. His mother had been taking him out for ice cream. Just the two of them, with security walking behind. Then someone had blocked the way. His mother had pulled him into her arms and turned her back toward them. His voice began to shake harder. He said he heard gunshots. His mother shoved him away and screamed at him to run, but he could not run. His legs would not move. Then he saw his mother fall. Blood. Blood everywhere. Blood splashed onto his face. Mira felt tears sliding down her own cheeks, but she did not wipe them away. She only listened, because that was what the boy needed. Mateo repeated that she had shoved him away, his voice cracking apart. If she had not shielded him, she would not have died. She died because of him. Because of him. Mira told him it was not because of him, her voice thick with emotion but steady. She told him to listen. It was not his fault. His mother protected him because she loved him. That was what she chose to do, not something he made her do. Mateo said that if he had not been there, Mira told him that if he had not been there, his mother would still have loved him the same, and she would want him to live, to be happy, not to blame himself for the rest of his life. Mateo looked up, gray eyes flooded with tears, and for the first time Mira saw the 8-year-old he should have been. Not a child made old by a fortress of walls, but a little boy breaking under a grief too large for him to carry. He asked if she truly believed that, his voice so small it barely carried. Mira said she believed it, and then something miraculous happened. Mateo, the boy who trusted no one, the boy who had locked himself behind cold armor for 2 years, flung himself into Mira's arms and cried. He cried as if he had never been allowed to cry, as if all the pain he had held back for years had finally found a way out. Mira held him, one hand stroking his back, and she began to sing. A Spanish lullaby her mother used to sing to her when she was little, before she left. Duérmete mi niño, duérmete mi amor. Her voice was gentle and warm, and little by little Mateo's sobs grew softer. His breathing evened out, his small body relaxing in her arms. Mira did not know how long she sat there, holding the sleeping boy and singing the lullaby again and again, and she did not see Dominic Corsetti standing outside the doorway, his back against the wall in the shadows, watching. In his gray eyes shimmered something Mira had never seen in this man before. A week passed faster than Mira expected. After that night, something had shifted between her and Mateo. The boy no longer looked at her with that cold, defensive stare. In its place was caution, yes, but not hostility. He began to answer when she asked him things, began to sit closer when she read stories to Nico, began to allow himself to be an ordinary 8-year-old, even if only in brief, fragile moments. And Nico clung to Mira like a shadow to a body, the 5-year-old quickly taking her in as family. Every morning he would run into her room, bounce onto her bed, and wake her with laughter and the stuffed dinosaur. Every night he demanded a story, a lullaby, and a tight squeeze before he fell asleep. Mira found herself loving these 2 children, a feeling she had never planned for and did not know what to do with. Dominic Corsetti remained a ghost inside his own home. He left before dawn and returned after midnight, swallowed whole by secret meetings and work no one was allowed to ask about. But Mira noticed something. Every time he came back, no matter how late, he paused at the boy's door. Sometimes only for a few seconds, sometimes longer, standing there in the dark and looking in. She did not know what he was searching for, the peace of his sons in sleep, or something else entirely. One weekend night, Mira was sitting on the large sofa in the family common room, a book of fairy tales open in her hands. Nico was curled on her lap, long since fallen asleep, his breathing steady, his small hand still gripping the stuffed dinosaur. Matteo sat beside her, his head resting against her shoulder, eyes half closed yet still fighting sleep so he could hear the whole story. Mira lowered her voice as she read, knowing Matteo would drift off before she reached the end of the page. The room was steeped in warm yellow lamplight, a faint scent of vanilla candle wax lingering in the air, and for the first time since she had come here, Mira felt peaceful. She did not hear the door open. Only when the feeling of being watched grew too strong did she lift her head. Dominic stood there, leaning against the doorway, still in his black suit as always, but his tie had been loosened. He held still like a statue, gray eyes fixed on the scene in front of him. Mira and his two sons, wrapped together like a warm family picture. Their eyes met, and Mira felt time stop. She could not breathe, could not move, could only look into those gray eyes and see something she did not understand. No longer cold, no longer frightening, but something deeper, softer, more hungry. That moment stretched out like it would never end, and Mira thought Dominic might say something. He leaned forward just slightly, his lips parting. Then he stopped. He gave a single nod, turned, and walked away. His footsteps faded down the hallway, leaving Mira with a heart beating wildly and a strange feeling she did not dare name. That night, after she put the boys to bed, Mira returned to her room and called Diego. She needed to hear her brother's voice, needed to remember who she was and why she was here. Diego answered, his voice faint through the phone but still bright, calling her sister. He said he had been about to call her. Today, the doctor had said his blood test results were better. Mira felt as if someone had lifted a stone from her chest. She told him that was wonderful, so wonderful. Diego asked how she was, whether the new job was going well. Mira hesitated for a second. She said it was fine. She was taking care of 2 children, and they were very sweet. Diego repeated, 2 children. Was she a nanny? He thought she did cleaning. Mira said it was basically the same, only now she did a little more. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Diego spoke slowly. He asked who she was working for. What company could be paying so much that she could send home that much money? Mira bit her lip. She did not want to lie to her brother, but she also could not tell the truth. She said it was just a rich family on Long Island. Diego said her name again, and his voice turned more serious. He said he watched the news. Corsetti. He asked if she was working for the Corsetti family. Mira's heart sank. She tried to speak. Diego said she was working for the Mafia. Sister. It was not a question. Mira told him she had no choice. He needed money for treatment. Diego cut her off, his voice full of worry. He told her to be careful. He had heard a lot about this man, Dominic Corsetti. People called him the devil. She had to be careful. Mira said she knew. She would be careful. But when she ended the call, Mira stared out the window into the black night and wondered whether she truly understood what she was facing. She thought of Dominic, of his gray eyes, and that strange moment tonight. She did not know that the danger was not coming from Dominic, but from someone she had never met. The second week began with a change Mira had not anticipated. Mrs. Delgado called her down to the kitchen early that morning, the older woman's face tighter than usual. She said there would be a family dinner tonight. Mira would be serving. Mira blinked. She thought she was only supposed to care for the boys. Mrs. Delgado said today she would do both. The boys would be having dinner with their father and Mrs. Delgado hesitated for a beat, and their uncle. The way she said the word uncle sent a chill over Mira, though she did not understand why. Mrs. Delgado handed her a more elegant black uniform than the one she usually wore, a pencil skirt and a high-collared white blouse. Mrs. Delgado told her to keep her head down, keep her mouth shut, pour wine when the glass ran low. Do not look anyone in the eye unless you are spoken to. Did she understand? Mira understood. She did not like it, but she understood. At 7 o'clock that evening, she stood in the grand dining room on the second floor, a room she had never entered before. The ceiling soared high with a crystal chandelier, and a long mahogany table that could seat 20 people stretched beneath it. Oil paintings covered the walls. Men with stern faces Mira assumed were Corsetti ancestors. Matteo and Nico had been dressed up, the two boys sitting beside their father at a table far too large for 4 people. Dominic sat at the head, in his familiar black suit, his face unreadable, but Mira could see he was more tense than usual, his jaw clenched, his shoulders rigid. Then the dining room door opened, and Mira saw the man who stepped inside. Vincent Corsetti. She knew who he was at once, though she had never met him. He resembled Dominic, the same sharp angles, the same tall, commanding build, but everything else was wrong. If Dominic carried a cold danger like the edge of a blade, Vincent felt like a venomous snake wrapped in silk. 42 years old, hair slicked back to perfection. A gray 3-piece suit, expensive and polished. He smiled as he entered, a wide smile that showed even white teeth. But Mira saw immediately that the smile never reached his eyes. His eyes were black as tar, cold and calculating, sweeping the room like a predator measuring its territory. He spread his arms as if to embrace Dominic and called him brother, but stopped when Dominic did not rise. Vincent said it had been a long time, and greeted his nephews too, Matteo and Nico, saying how big they had gotten. Matteo did not answer. The boy simply watched his uncle with the wary eyes Mira had come to recognize. Nico mumbled a greeting and looked down at his plate, his small hand unconsciously gripping Dominic's sleeve. Mira stood in the corner with the wine bottle in her hand, trying to become invisible, just as Mrs. Delgado had instructed, but she felt Vincent's gaze slide over her, pause, and return to her again. Vincent drew out a sound of interest as he sat in the chair opposite Dominic. He said the girl was pretty. Where had Dominic hired her? Dominic did not look up. He said she cared for his children. It was not Vincent's business. Vincent gave a soft laugh, but there was an edge in it. He said everything in this house was his business, little brother, or had Dominic forgotten they were family? Dinner began in a strained silence. Mira poured wine, cleared plates, fought to keep her hands from trembling. She could feel the current running between the two brothers, something toxic and dangerous beneath the civilized surface. Midway through the meal, Vincent set his knife down and looked at Dominic. He said he had heard Dominic was considering pulling out of the Western deal. Dominic said he was not considering it. He had decided. Vincent said Dominic could not make that kind of decision alone. His voice stayed mild, but steel lay underneath. It was the family's money, the family's territory. Dominic said it was drugs. At last he lifted his gaze to his brother. He said he had already said it. They did not touch drugs. Not ever. Vincent tilted his head and smiled coldly. He said their father had said many things, but their father was not here anymore, was he? He told Dominic not to let the kids make him weak. Dominic wanted to be a good father. Vincent understood. But Dominic should not forget who he was. He should not forget what they were. Dominic set his wineglass down, slowly, with control. But Mira saw his fingers tightening until they went pale. Dominic told Vincent he should remember who was sitting in this chair. Vincent leaned back, his eyes like ice. He said he remembered. He remembered every day that their father had been wrong to choose Dominic. Dominic was too soft, too emotional, but it was fine. Time would prove who was right. The dinner ended in suffocating air. Mira cleared the dishes with shaking hands, grateful the children had been taken upstairs early by Mrs. Delgado. Vincent rose, buttoned his vest again, and headed for the door. But as he passed Mira, he stopped. He asked her name. Mira swallowed. She said, "Mira, sir, Mira Santos." Vincent repeated it, as if tasting the name on his lips. He said it was a beautiful name. She should take good care of his nephews. They were valuable assets. Then he walked away. But before he turned into the hallway, he looked back at her one more time. That look made Mira's blood run cold. It was not the look of desire, not the look of curiosity. It was the look of a man calculating, placing her into some position on a board she could not see. Only when Vincent vanished around the corner did Mira dare to breathe. She turned back and saw Dominic watching her, his gray eyes holding something like worry. He told her to stay away from his brother, in a low voice, never be alone with him. Mira nodded, not needing to ask why. She had seen enough in Vincent Corsetti's eyes. When Vincent left, he stopped to look at Mira with a gaze she would never forget, the gaze of a man calculating. The next morning, Mira was on her way down to the kitchen to get breakfast for the boys when Mrs. Delgado stopped her in the hallway. The housekeeper drew her into a shadowed corner where there were no cameras and no one passed through. Mrs. Delgado's eyes sweeping the corridor before settling on Mira's face. Mrs. Delgado asked in a low voice what Mira had done last night that made Mr. Vincent notice her so much. Mira shook her head. She said she had done nothing. She had only poured wine and cleared the table the way Mrs. Delgado had instructed. "Mrs. Delgado said, and yet he asked your name." She let out a breath, her aged face tight with worry. She told Mira to listen, to be careful with Mr. Vincent. He did not like anyone who was close to Mr. Dominic or to the boys. Anyone. Mira asked why, though she already sensed the answer. Mrs. Delgado fell silent for a long time, as if weighing how much she should say. Finally, she breathed out, her voice so small Mira had to lean in to hear her. "Mrs. Delgado said Mr. Vincent had once been the chosen successor. Old man Corsetti, the father of the two men, had trained Vincent from childhood, preparing everything for him to take power. Everyone had believed it was inevitable." Mira asked, "Then why Mr. Dominic had become the heir?" Mrs. Delgado said it was because the old man changed his mind at the last moment. She looked around again, her voice nearly a whisper. "Right before he died, he declared Dominic would be the successor. He said Vincent was too cruel, too without limits. He said a leader had to know when to stop, and Vincent never stopped." Mira felt a shiver move through her. She remembered Vincent's gaze the night before, the way he had looked at her as if she were a piece on a board. Mira asked if Vincent hated Dominic for that. Mrs. Delgado gave a thin laugh with no humor in it. She said Mira did not understand. Mr. Vincent did not hate. He waited. He calculated. He was patient like a venomous snake waiting for its prey. Mrs. Delgado paused, her eyes dropping to the floor as if fighting with herself. When she looked up, Mira saw something in her eyes, a fear that had been collecting for years. Mira asked what else she knew, her voice trembling slightly. Mrs. Delgado began to speak about Mateo and Nico's mother, then stopped. She said Mira already knew how she died. Mira said she had been assassinated by a rival gang. Mateo had told her. Mrs. Delgado said that was the official story. She pressed the word official as if it smelled rotten, but some people said the assassination had not come from a rival gang. Mira's heart skipped. She asked if Mrs. Delgado meant. Mrs. Delgado cut her off and said she meant nothing, and Mira should say nothing too. Do not talk, do not ask, do not look into it, do nothing. Mira only needed to know one thing: keep the boys safe, and keep herself safe. There were secrets in this house that if Mira learned them, she would not live long enough to tell anyone. Mrs. Delgado turned to leave, but stopped at the end of the hallway. She added one more thing. The servant before Mira, the one who vanished, had also started asking questions the way Mira was. She had also drawn Mr. Vincent's attention. Then Mrs. Delgado disappeared around the corner, leaving Mira standing there with her heart pounding and pieces beginning to form in her mind. Vincent wanted power. Dominic stood in his way. And if Dominic died, who would inherit? Mateo, a child of 8, with Vincent as guardian. But if Mateo and Nico were gone too, Mira lifted her eyes to the staircase leading up to the 3rd floor, where the 2 boys were waiting for her with breakfast and smiles. If Vincent had been able to kill Dominic's wife, what would he do to his 2 sons? 3 days after her conversation with Mrs. Delgado, the first accident happened. Mira was sitting on the rug with Nico, the boy playing with a new set of building toys that someone had left outside the door that morning. She did not know where the toys had come from, but Nico squealed with delight when he saw them, so she let him play. Nico picked up a red star-shaped piece and brought it toward his mouth, the way 5-year-olds sometimes do. Instinct made Mira snatch it away before it could touch his lips. She told him to wait. She inspected the piece, and her heart stopped for a beat. Inside the hollow plastic was a shard of broken glass, sharp as a blade, so small it was almost invisible through the clear plastic. If Nico had bitten down, if that sliver of glass had gone into the boy's mouth, Mira could not bear to think any further. She checked the entire set and found 2 more pieces with glass hidden inside. Her hands shook as she stuffed everything into her apron pocket, telling Nico the toys were broken and she would find him another set. She told herself it had only been an accident, a manufacturing defect, the kind of thing that happened every day. But Mrs. Delgado's voice kept echoing in her head. Secrets in this house. 2 days later, the 2nd accident happened. Breakfast was brought up from the kitchen as usual, pancakes for Nico and toast with jam for Mateo. Mateo had a severe peanut allergy. Everyone in the house knew it, and the kitchen kept a long list of things the boy was not allowed to eat. Mira set the plate in front of Mateo, and she smelled something. Faint, almost impossible to notice, but it was there, the smell of peanuts. She yanked the plate back before Mateo could pick up the toast, ignoring the boy's protest. She lifted the piece to her nose and breathed in again, and her heart sank. The jam. There were peanuts in the jam. Not much, only a trace. Enough to slip past anyone who was not paying attention, but enough to trigger anaphylactic shock in a child with a severe allergy. Mira went down to the kitchen, found Mrs. Delgado, and told her about both incidents. The head housekeeper listened, her face unchanged, then let out a sigh. She said she would speak to the kitchen. It was probably only carelessness. There were many people working here. Mistakes were normal. Mira could not keep the doubt out of her voice. 2 times in a row. Toys with broken glass and food laced with an allergen, all in the same week. Mrs. Delgado looked at her, her gaze warning. She asked what Mira was implying. Mira opened her mouth, then closed it again. She remembered the servant who had vanished, the one who had asked too many questions. She said it was nothing. Mrs. Delgado was right. It was probably only an oversight. But Mira did not believe it. From then on, she began checking everything herself. For every meal brought up, she tasted it first. For every new toy, she examined every edge and corner. She did not let the boys drink anything she had not poured herself, did not let them eat anything she had not prepared, or checked with her own hands. She moved like someone becoming paranoid, always looking around, always on guard, always waiting for the next accident. Dominic noticed the change. One evening, when he came to see the boys before bedtime, he found Mira checking Nico's cup of milk for the 3rd time. He asked what she was doing, his voice giving away no emotion. Mira nearly spilled the milk. She said it was nothing. She was only making sure it was not too hot. Dominic watched her for a long moment, gray eyes seeming to dig into her mind. He asked what she was worried about. The directness froze Mira. She thought of the shards of glass inside the toy pieces, the peanuts in the jam, Mrs. Delgado's warning, Vincent's calculating stare. She should tell him. She knew she should tell Dominic about her suspicions. But what if she was wrong? What if it truly had been an accident, and she accused his brother? Vincent was blood, family, and she was only a servant who had been here for 2 weeks. If she spoke and she was wrong, she would lose her job, lose the income paying for Diego's treatment, or worse, she would lose her life. Mira said there was nothing, her voice steadier than she expected. She only wanted to make sure the boys were safe. Dominic kept looking at her a moment longer, then nodded and turned away. Mira let out a breath, not knowing she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The storm slammed into New York on the 12th night since Mira began caring for the boys. Wind howled outside the windows, rain lashed the glass like thousands of tiny bullets, and thunder ripped open the pitch-black sky. Mira was reading to the children in the family sitting room when lightning flared, bright enough to bleach the world white. Thunder detonated an instant later, and every light in the villa went dead. Darkness swallowed the room in a blink. Nico's scream tore through the air before Mira could even move. The 5-year-old hurled himself into her lap, his small body shaking hard, both hands clutching her shirt as if he feared she might vanish. He cried that it was dark, that it was dark, that he was scared, his voice drowning in the roar of thunder. Mira held him tight, one hand rubbing his back, her mouth close to his ear, whispering steady reassurance. She turned to find Mateo and saw the 8-year-old standing beside the sofa, back straight, both hands clenched into fists. In the intermittent light of lightning through the window, Mira could see Mateo trying to be brave, but his lips trembled, and his eyes were wide in the dark. He was afraid too, perhaps more afraid than Nico, but he was trying to carry it alone the way he had for the past 2 years. Mira called to him softly, telling him to come over with her and his brother. The boy hesitated for a second, then walked to her as if his legs moved without needing permission from his pride. Mira drew him down beside her, and he leaned into her shoulder, his rigid body gradually loosening. She told both of them she was not going anywhere. She was here. They were safe. She remembered the candles in the drawer Mrs. Delgado had shown her for emergencies. Mira gently settled Nico onto Mateo's lap, told them to hold each other while she got candles, then felt her way through the dark to the drawer. When the candles were lit, their warm flame drove back some of the terror in the darkness. Mira set candles on the table, on the shelf, anywhere the children could see, making a small circle of light in the middle of the raging storm outside. She sat in the middle of the sofa and pulled both boys close, Nico curled against one side, Mateo leaning into the other. Mira asked if she should tell them a story. She began to tell one, not from the book, but from her own memory. She told them about Puerto Rico, about her grandmother's small house near the sea, about summer nights when she and Diego lay on the roof counting stars. She told them about her mother, the woman who used to sing her lullabies in old Spanish songs. Then she began to sing, her voice soft, just loud enough to push back the distant thunder. Duérmete mi niño, duérmete mi amor. Little by little, the boys' breathing grew steadier, their bodies softened, fear melting in the warmth and the sound of her voice. Nico fell asleep. Mateo drifted, his head nodding against her shoulder. The door opened without a sound. Mira lifted her head and saw Dominic standing there, clothes soaked through, hair plastered to his forehead, as if he had crossed the storm to get home. His gray eyes found the scene before him and stopped. Mira with his 2 sons in her arms, candlelight shimmering over their faces, a warm, peaceful picture in the middle of the violent night. Mira started to rise, started to say something, but Dominic lifted a hand, signaling her to stay where she was. Then he did something that stunned her. Instead of leaving the way he always did, Dominic took off his wet coat, set it on the floor, and sat down beside them, right beside Mira, close enough that she could feel heat radiating from him even though his clothes were cold. He did not speak at first. He only sat there, looking at his sleeping sons, and then looking at her. In the candlelight, Dominic Corsetti looked entirely different. No longer the Mafia boss with steel eyes and a stone face, only a tired father, a lonely man, a human being with a crack in the armor he had worn for so many years. Soft, vulnerable, real. He thanked her in a low voice, his tone deeper and warmer than she had ever heard. He thanked her for being there with them. Mira said it was her job. Dominic shook his head slightly. He said no, this was not her job. This was far more than that. They sat in silence as the storm outside began to ease, candlelight dancing on the walls. Somewhere in the night, Dominic's hand rested on the sofa, right beside Mira's hand. Then his fingers brushed hers, gentle, as if by accident. Mira did not pull away. Neither did Dominic. They stayed there all night, their hands touching in candlelight, the children sleeping safely in her arms, and the storm slowly fading beyond the window. That night, Mira understood she had crossed a dangerous line. She was beginning to feel something for her Mafia boss. After that stormy night, everything between Mira and Dominic became subtly different. Nothing changed on the surface. He still left early and came home late. He was still cold and distant with almost everyone, but every time their eyes met, something flared, an invisible current that stole Mira's breath. She tried not to think about it, about the feeling of his fingers brushing hers in candlelight, about the way he looked at her as if she were something precious. She was the help, and he was a Mafia boss. It was crazy, dangerous, impossible. But her heart did not listen to reason. In the middle of those tense days, Marco Benedetti appeared like a fresh breeze. He was Dominic's personal bodyguard, 34 years old, tall and handsome with messy brown hair and an easy smile. Unlike the other guards who were always grim and intimidating, Marco joked and stayed friendly, especially with Mira. One morning, Marco showed up at the door of the boys' room holding a hot latte and said it was coffee for the princess. He said he saw she had been up late the night before and figured she needed it. Mira smiled as she took it, grateful for the kindness. She thanked him and said he did not have to do that. Marco said he knew, but he wanted to. He winked and added that, besides, who would not want to make the prettiest girl in the villa happy? It was only harmless teasing, the kind of thing Marco said to everyone. That was how he was, charming and funny, and Mira did not think much of it. In the days that followed, Marco kept stopping by the 3rd floor, bringing her a cup of tea one time, a sweet pastry from the kitchen another time. He told jokes, asked after the boys, and made Mira laugh when she was wound tight with worry. One afternoon, Mira was standing in the hallway talking with Marco after he had brought up some fruit for the children. Marco was telling a funny story about the time he almost shot himself in the foot when he was new to the job, and Mira laughed, the first easy laugh she had managed in days. Marco said she had a beautiful laugh. He put a hand on her shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze. He told her she should laugh more. At that exact moment, Mira felt eyes on her. She turned her head and saw Dominic at the far end of the hallway, just stepping out from the stairs. He stood perfectly still, gray eyes frozen on what he was seeing, on Marco's hand resting on Mira's shoulder. Dominic's jaw tightened, the muscles in his face going hard. Marco saw his boss too. He dropped his hand at once and straightened. He addressed Dominic. Dominic answered his name, his voice cold as ice, and ordered him downstairs immediately. Marco did not need to be told twice. He nodded to Mira and hurried away, leaving her alone under Dominic's stare. Dominic said nothing. He only looked at her for a long moment, then walked into his office and shut the door, the click sharp and final. Mira thought it was over, but half an hour later, Mrs. Delgado came to her room. She said Mr. Corsetti wanted to see her in his office. Mira's heart raced as she stepped into a room she had never entered before. Dominic's office was large and dark, the curtains drawn tight, only a desk lamp throwing light over stacks of paperwork. He sat behind the desk, both hands on the wood, gray eyes fixed straight on her. He told her to close the door. Mira obeyed and stood there, not knowing whether she should sit or remain standing. Dominic asked if Marco had bothered her. The question startled her. She blinked and said no. Sir, Marco had only been friendly. Dominic repeated the word friendly as if it tasted bitter. He said Marco brought her coffee. Marco made her laugh. Marco touched her. Mira said they were only friends. Dominic cut her off, his voice sharp and cold. She did not need friends in this house. Then he stood, walked around the desk, and stopped directly in front of her, close enough that Mira could smell his cologne. He said he did not want her getting close to anyone else in this house. Mira looked up, and suddenly she understood. This was not a boss worrying about discipline or rules. This was a man who was jealous. Dominic Corsetti, the Mafia boss, was jealous because a bodyguard brought her coffee. Mira asked why. Her voice no more than a whisper. Why did he care? Dominic fell silent, jaw clenched, as if he were fighting with himself. Then the cold mask cracked, and she saw something in his eyes, an emotion he had tried to hide. He told her she knew why, his voice low, each word dragged out as if it hurt to say it. They stood there, so close their breaths mingled, the tension between them thick enough to cut. Mira waited. Part of her wanted him to touch her, wanted him to shatter the last distance between them, but Dominic did not. He stepped back, both hands clenched into fists as if to restrain himself. He told her she could go, his voice rough with strain. Mira turned and walked out, her heart pounding out of control. He had not touched her. Not yet, but she knew everything had changed. That night, Mira could not sleep. She lay on the bed, staring up at the ceiling in the dark, her mind spinning with what had happened in Dominic's office. The look in his eyes when he said, "You know why," the roughness in his voice, the breath-stealing closeness between them. She did not know what she was feeling, or rather, she knew and could not bear to admit it. After hours of turning restlessly, Mira got up and slipped out of her room. She needed air, needed space to think, needed anything other than these four walls closing in on her. Her feet carried her to the library on the second floor, the room she had stumbled upon by accident when she got lost the week before. The library was large and quiet, with bookcases that climbed to the ceiling and a leather armchair beside the fireplace. Mira pushed the door open, and her heart stopped for a beat. Dominic was there. He sat in the shadows, only the weak flicker of firelight cutting across his sharp features, a glass of whiskey in his hand, the bottle half emptied on the table beside the chair. He looked up at the sound of the door, gray eyes finding her in the darkness. Mira apologized, saying she did not know, and she took a step back, ready to turn away. Dominic told her to stay. It was not an order. It was almost a plea. Mira hesitated, then stepped in and closed the door behind her. She sat in the chair opposite him, letting the warmth of the fire push back the late-night chill. They sat in silence for a long time, with only the crackle of the flames and the steady ticking of the clock. Then Dominic spoke, his voice low and a little rough from the drink. He asked if she had family, Mira, besides her brother. The question surprised her. It was the first time he had asked about her life beyond this house. She answered softly that there was no one else. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 19. A drunk driver had crashed straight into their car. They died on the spot. Dominic said he was sorry. Mira said it had been a long time. She looked into the fire. She said she only had Diego. He had leukemia and was being treated at the hospital. That was why she was here, doing any work she could to pay for his care. Dominic said she sacrificed a great deal for her brother. Mira said her brother was all she had left. Then she looked at Dominic and asked about him. Did he have no one besides Matteo and Nico? Dominic was quiet for a long time, staring into his glass as if searching for the answer there. Then he spoke, his voice coming from somewhere very far away. He said he used to. His wife, Elena. He paused and swallowed a mouthful of whiskey. He said she died because of him, because of what he was. She knew who she was marrying, knew how dangerous this life was, but she stayed anyway. She said she loved him enough to accept everything. Bitterness edged his words. and he let her die, right in front of their son. Mira told him it was not his fault. Dominic said it was his fault. He looked up, eyes red and full of pain. He said he should have protected her better. He should have been there. He did not deserve her, and she died because of that. Mira stood and moved toward him, not knowing what she was doing yet unable to stop. She knelt beside his chair and looked up at the strongest man she had ever met, now breaking apart. She told him gently he could not blame himself forever. Elena chose to stay because she loved him. She would not want him to live like this, full of guilt and suffering. She would want him happy. She would want his children happy. Dominic looked at her, gray eyes piercing straight into her soul. Then his hand lifted and gently brushed back a curl that had fallen across her face. His fingers grazed her skin, leaving a trail of heat, then paused on her cheek. He whispered that she should run far away from him. He was dangerous. He would destroy her the way he had destroyed Elena. Mira heard herself answer that she was not going anywhere, her voice steady in a way that startled her. She said she was not Elena. She knew who he was. She knew what this world was like, and she was still here. Something in Dominic's eyes broke. He pulled her up, one hand at her waist, one hand still on her cheek, and then he kissed her. The kiss was not gentle, not sweet the way it is in fairy tales. It was fierce and desperate, packed with emotions held back for weeks. Loneliness, hunger, and something deeper Mira did not dare name. She kissed him back, her arms sliding around his neck, drawing him closer, and the world narrowed until there was only them, the fire, and the dark. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, forehead to forehead, their breaths mingling. Dominic said this was a mistake, his voice raw. Mira said she knew, but neither of them stepped away. The next day, while the boys studied with their tutor, Mira went out to the back garden to breathe in some fresh air. She needed time alone, needed to put her thoughts back in order after what had happened the night before. The kiss in the library still burned on her lips, and she did not know how she was supposed to face Dominic now. Everything had changed, but she could not tell whether it was a good change or a bad one. The grounds of the Corsetti estate stretched wide, with hedges trimmed into careful lines and a marble fountain that whispered to itself. Mira stood beside a small pond, watching koi fish glide beneath clear water, trying to find a sliver of peace inside the chaos churning in her chest. A voice slid in behind her, and the blood in Mira's body turned to ice. "Alone, little girl." She turned and saw Vincent Corsetti a few steps away, appearing from nowhere like a ghost. He wore a dark blue suit and held a half-smoked cigar, his familiar smile never reaching his tar-black eyes. Mira forced her voice to stay steady and addressed him, saying she did not know he was here. Vincent said he had come to visit his nephews, but it seemed he had found something more interesting. He moved closer, each step slow, deliberate, calculated. He told her that she should understand. He had people everywhere in this house, and they told him everything. Everything. Mira's heart hammered, but she did not step back. She said she did not understand what he meant. Vincent said, softly, that he thought she understood very well. He stopped right in front of her and blew cigar smoke into her face. "The library, last night. You and my brother." It felt like a fist drove into Mira's stomach. Someone had been watching them. Someone had seen. Vincent lowered his voice, but each word carried poison. He demanded to know who she thought she was. A poor servant girl, with a brother dying slowly in the hospital, daring to climb into her employer's bed. What did she think she could become? The new lady of the Corsetti villa. Mira lifted her chin even while fear shook through her from the inside out. She said she was not thinking anything at all. She asked him what he wanted. Vincent smiled, cold and pleased. He said he liked that, straightforward. He told her what he wanted was for her to disappear from here. Tonight, pack up her few pathetic belongings, walk out of that gate, and never come back. Forget what she had seen. Forget Dominic. Forget the boys. Pretend the last 2 weeks had never happened. Mira asked what would happen if she did not leave. Vincent said, calmly, that she would leave. He tilted his head, his gaze like a snake's. Then he spoke her brother's name and details that made the world tilt. Diego Santos, Mount Sinai Hospital, room 412, the 4th floor, the oncology ward. The boy lay in the bed by the window. He liked watching baseball in the evening, and the night shift nurse was named Patricia. Mira could not breathe. Vincent continued, as if he were discussing the weather. Accidents happened every day in places like that, you know. A wrong dose, a device malfunction, a shift where no one was paying attention. How tragic that a boy so young would have to leave so early. Rage surged up Mira's throat, burning away her fear, and she called him a monster. Vincent answered that he was a realist. He dropped the cigar to the ground and crushed it under his heel. He told her she had until tonight to decide. Her brother, or the Corsetti children. Choose. Mira asked why, her voice trembling not with fear now but with fury. Why would he do all of this? They were his own nephews. Vincent's eyes darkened. He said they were obstacles, like their mother, like anyone who stood between him and what belonged to him. Then he grabbed her by the throat and shoved her backward. Mira's back slammed into a tree trunk, breath locking in her chest as Vincent's fingers tightened. He hissed that she had chosen the wrong side. Little girl. She should have stayed in the shadows like the other servants. Now it was too late to go back. Mira fought for air, her hands clawing at Vincent's wrist, but she could not move him. Black spots began to bloom at the edges of her vision. Then a voice cut through the garden like a blade, cold as ice, thick with killing intent. Take your hand off her. Vincent turned his head, and Mira saw Dominic standing at the entrance to the garden, his eyes like two coals on fire, his fists clenched so hard they looked carved from stone. She had never seen him as terrifying as he was in that moment. Vincent released his hand from Mira's throat, and she staggered forward, coughing hard as she dragged air back into her lungs. Dominic stepped between them, his body a wall of flesh and fury separating her from the man who had just tried to crush the life out of her. Vincent adjusted the collar of his suit, calm as if nothing had happened. He called Dominic his little brother. He said he had only been talking to Dominic's servant. Dominic answered that Vincent's hand had been on her neck, and his voice was low and dangerous. That was not talking. Vincent said she had been insolent with him, and he had only taught her a small lesson about how to behave in this family. He smiled, but the smile could not hide the tension in his eyes. He asked if Dominic had a problem with how he treated the help. Dominic said she belonged to him, each word sharp as if cut from a blade. She took care of his children. She lived under his roof, and no one, not even Vincent, was allowed to touch someone who belonged to him. The two brothers faced each other, the air between them thick enough to slice. Mira stood behind Dominic, her throat still burning, watching two men of the same blood standing on opposite sides of a line. Vincent warned Dominic to be careful. He stepped back, his tone still mild, but a knife hidden inside it. Dominic was letting a servant girl come between their family. Their father would not be pleased if he were still alive. Dominic answered that their father was dead, and Vincent had no right to speak in his name. Vincent said, family came first. He turned and started to leave, but paused at the garden entrance and looked back, his eyes cold as ice. He told Dominic not to forget that. Then he disappeared beyond the hedges, leaving Mira and Dominic standing in the silent garden. Dominic turned to her and lifted his hand to examine her neck, his fingers brushing lightly over skin already reddening from the pressure. He asked if she was all right. Mira said she was, though her throat still hurt. Dominic told her to come inside. He took her hand and led her away, not to her room or the boys' rooms, but to his private office. He shut the door, slid the lock, and poured a glass of water, handing it to her. He told her to drink. Mira did, feeling the cool water soothe the burn in her throat. When she set the glass down, Dominic was looking at her with an expression she could not read. He told her to tell him everything Vincent had said to her, and everything she had been hiding from him. Mira understood she could not stay silent anymore. She began at the beginning, with the small accidents she had caught, the shards of glass inside Nico's toys, the peanuts in Mateo's food. She told him about Mrs. Delgado's warning, about how Vincent had once been the chosen successor before their father changed his mind, and she told him about the suspicion the housekeeper had hinted at, that Elena's death might not have come from a rival gang. Dominic listened, his face giving away nothing, but the hand on the desk tightened until the knuckles went white. He asked why she had not told him sooner. Mira told the truth, because she was afraid. Vincent was Dominic's own brother. She was only a servant. If she accused him and she was wrong, she would die. If she was right, she could still die. Dominic closed his eyes and drew a long breath. When he opened them, Mira saw deep pain there. Dominic said he had suspected Vincent for a long time, since Elena died. Everything had been too perfect, too well-timed, but he had no proof. And Vincent was blood, family. Dominic wanted to believe he was wrong. Mira told him he was not wrong. Dominic agreed. No, he was not wrong. Dominic stood and went to the window, staring out. He said his brother wanted this empire, everything their father had left behind. By the laws of the family, if Dominic died, Matteo would inherit, because he was the eldest son. But Matteo was only 8. He would need a guardian until he turned 18. Mira said that guardian would be Vincent. Dominic said yes, and Vincent would have the right to control everything until Matteo came of age. Dominic turned back to her, his eyes dark. But if Matteo and Nico died before Dominic, with no heir left, Vincent would get everything. The entire empire would belong to him. Mira leapt to her feet and said Dominic had to protect the boys. He had to do something. Dominic said he needed proof. His voice carried helplessness. If he killed his own brother without a legitimate reason, the organization would turn on him. They would see him as a man who murdered family, a man who could not be trusted. He would lose everything, and the boys would have no one left to protect them. Mira asked what they would do. Dominic said they would trap Vincent. He stepped close, taking her hand. They would make Vincent slip, make him reveal himself. And when he did, Dominic would end it all. They planned that very night, carefully, in detail. Dominic would pretend to leave on a business trip. The boys would have additional secret security, and Mira would be the eyes on the inside. They thought they had time. They thought they were in control. But Vincent moved first. 3 days after the confrontation in the garden, Dominic received an urgent call at midnight. Mira woke when she heard him on the phone in the hallway, his voice tight and rushed. When he appeared at her doorway, his face was drawn with worry. He told her he had to go to Manhattan. There was an emergency meeting with the elders, connected to the transfer of power he had been preparing. It could not be postponed. Mira sat up, her heart tightening. Now, what about the boys? What about Vincent? Dominic said he knew. He stepped into the room and sat on the edge of her bed. He told her he had doubled the security. Marco would go with him, but 6 men would stay behind to guard the villa. They were all men he trusted. Mira asked if he was sure. Dominic said he had checked every one of them personally. They were loyal to him, not to Vincent. He lifted his hand to her cheek, his thumb brushing gently. He told her to keep the boys in their room and not move a single step away. Lock the door from the inside. If anything happened, anything at all, call him immediately. His number was the only number she needed. Mira nodded, swallowing the unease rising in her throat. Dominic kissed her forehead, then went into the boys' room and kissed his 2 sleeping sons goodbye. When he left, Mira stood at the window and watched the black car glide through the estate gate and disappear into the night. She had a bad feeling, but there was nothing she could do except wait. That night passed with an eerie kind of calm. Mira spent the evening playing with the boys, reading to them, then putting them to bed. Matteo fell asleep faster than usual. Nico hugged his stuffed dinosaur and whispered goodnight to her. Mira locked the boys' door from the inside, checked the windows, then sat down in the chair beside the bed, deciding she would stay awake and keep watch all night. Around 10 o'clock, a maid brought up a tray of dinner for her. Mira recognized her as one of the night shift staff, a young woman Mira had spoken with a few times. The girl said Mrs. Delgado told her Mira had not eaten anything all day, and she had been sent to bring food up. Mira was not hungry, but she knew she needed strength. She thanked the girl and began to eat. Hot chicken soup and bread, nothing out of the ordinary. She ate almost the entire bowl when dizziness hit. At first it was mild, as if she were simply exhausted after a long day. Then the room began to spin. Her vision blurred, and her legs would not hold her. Sedative. The realization cut through the fog in her mind like lightning. The food had been drugged. Mira staggered to her feet and pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She tried to call Dominic, but the screen flashed no signal. She tried again and failed again. The phone signal was being blocked. Someone had jammed the villa. She tried to move toward the boys' door, but her legs felt filled with lead. She collapsed to the floor, her head striking the rug, the world smearing into black. Before consciousness left her completely, Mira heard the lock click open. Heavy footsteps entered the room, and through eyes that were closing, she saw a figure step over her and go straight into the boys' room. She wanted to scream, to get up, to do anything, but her body would not obey. Darkness took her. When Mira woke, her head felt like it was being split open, and morning light was pouring through the window. She did not know how long she had been out. She clawed her way up, memory crashing back like a flood. The boys. She lunged toward Matteo and Nico's beds, and her heart shattered. The beds were empty. The blankets had been pulled to the floor. Nico's stuffed dinosaur lay abandoned on the pillow. The boys were gone. Mira burst out of the room like someone gone mad, screaming Matteo and Nico's names down the length of the hallway. She flew down the stairs, nearly pitching forward because her head was still swimming from the sedative. Where was security? Where were the 6 men Dominic said he had posted here to guard the villa? Where were they? She found 2 guards standing in the main foyer, their faces empty, as if nothing had happened at all. "The children!" Mira shouted, grabbing the front of one man's shirt. "Matteo and Nico, they are gone. Someone took them." The guard looked at her without a flicker of concern in his eyes. He said they had not seen anything. The night had been quiet. "What are you talking about?" Mira could not believe what she was hearing. "The boys are not in their room. Someone came in and took them." The other guard spoke in the same flat tone, saying maybe she had dreamed it. They had stood watch all night. No one came in. No one went out. Mira stumbled back, and the truth rose in front of her, hard and unmistakable. They were lying. They knew. They were part of this. Vincent had bought them. Dominic thought he had checked carefully, thought they were loyal, but he had been wrong. Vincent had had years to seed his people everywhere, and last night, when Marco went with Dominic, when the truly loyal men were not here, Vincent had moved. Mira turned and ran, not knowing what to do, not knowing where to go. She tried calling Dominic again, but the signal was still blocked. She wanted to scream, to cry, to slam her head into the wall because she had let this happen. She had promised she would not leave. She had promised she would protect them, and she had failed. "Mira," a whispered call stopped her mid-step. Mrs. Delgado stood at the corner of the hall, motioning her closer, her face drained of color, her eyes darting around as if she feared someone was watching. Mira ran to her and seized her hand. "What do you know? Where are the boys? Who took them?" "Keep calm," Mrs. Delgado hissed through her teeth. "The walls have ears. Follow me." She led Mira into a small room, shut the door, then turned to her with eyes full of fear. She said she did not know for sure where the boys were, but she had overheard certain things. "Say it," Mira demanded. "The basement." Mrs. Delgado swallowed hard. "There is an old area in the back of the basement, where they used to keep a cold storage for meat. No one goes down there anymore. Not for years. I heard Tony Russo on the phone this morning. He mentioned the basement and the boys." "Tony Russo," Mira repeated. "Vincent's thug," Mrs. Delgado said. "He pretends he works for Dominic, but everyone knows whose man he is." Mira did not wait for anything else. She tore out of the room and sprinted toward the stairs that led down to the basement. She heard Mrs. Delgado calling after her to be careful, but she did not stop. The boys were waiting. The boys needed her. The Corsetti basement was dark and bitterly cold, the smell of damp and old concrete hitting her like a slap. Mira ran past shelves stacked with wooden crates and forgotten things, pushing deeper into a section she had never set foot in before. The low hum of machinery pulsed somewhere ahead, the sound of refrigeration, like the heartbeat of a monster waiting in the dark. She followed the noise, turned a corner, and saw it. A huge metal door to an industrial freezer, the kind used to store meat in bulk, big enough to lock a person inside, big enough to kill a person. Mira rushed to it and pressed her ear against the freezing metal. At first she heard only the steady drone of the cooling system, but then she heard it. Faint sobbing, the thin, broken crying of children. Matteo, Nico. She screamed their names and pounded the door. "It is me! It is Mira!" The crying rose, louder now, more desperate. "Mira, help us. It is so cold." Mira grabbed the handle and pulled, but it would not budge. Someone had locked it from the outside. She spun, searching for anything to break the lock, but there was nothing. She slammed her fists against the door, kicked it, screamed and cried, but the metal was thick as a fortress wall. "I will get you out," she said, her voice shaking. "I promise, I will get you out." Footsteps sounded behind her, slow and even. "I told you to run." Vincent's voice drifted out of the darkness, and Mira turned to face the nightmare. Vincent stepped out of the darkness, his gray suit flawless, as if he were arriving at a party instead of coming to kill. Behind him stood Tony Russo and 2 other enforcers, all of them holding guns, their faces hard as stone. Mira backed up until her spine met the freezing metal of the industrial freezer door, the children's cries inside it tearing at her heart. Vincent said she was truly stubborn, his voice gentle, almost like praise. He said he had given her a chance. He had told her to run, to go back to her brother, to live her ordinary life, but she chose to stay. Mira told him to open the door, her voice trembling, not from fear for herself, but from what was happening behind her. The boys were freezing to death in there. Please, he could kill her, but let them go. Vincent laughed, a cold sound that echoed through the basement. He told her she still did not understand. The boys had to die. That was the whole point. He walked closer, hands in his pockets as if this were only a normal conversation. With no air, Dominic would collapse. He would lose his reason to fight, lose everything he was protecting. And when Dominic weakened, when he no longer had the strength to hold power, Vincent would take everything. This empire would belong to Vincent, as it should have belonged to him from the beginning. Mira screamed that he was their uncle. They were his blood. How could he? Vincent cut her off, his eyes flashing with cruelty. Blood. He said his father was blood too, and still his father chose Dominic over him. His father said Vincent was too ruthless, that he had no heart, but his father was wrong. Vincent said he had a heart. He simply knew when to sacrifice it for a greater purpose. He tilted his head, looking at Mira the way one might look at a pitiful insect. Their father chose the wrong man. Vincent was only correcting his father's mistake. Mira said Vincent killed Elena, the truth finally clear. Not a rival gang. Vincent. Vincent nodded and told her she was smart. Elena started to suspect him. She noticed money disappearing, noticed secret meetings, noticed things no one should have seen. She dug too deep, and she found him. His gaze turned to ice, so he had to remove her, the same way he would remove Mira now. Mira said Dominic would find out the truth. Dominic would kill him. Vincent said Dominic would not have time to do anything. By the time Dominic got back, the boys would be frozen to death. Mira would be gone, and Vincent would be the one comforting his grieving little brother. Vincent turned to Tony and told him to kill her, dispose of all three, and make sure no one ever found anything. Tony stepped forward, drew his gun, his face empty of emotion. Mira looked at the barrel pointed at her and knew she was about to die. But she was not afraid for herself. She was afraid for the two children shivering in the freezer behind her, afraid of the promises she would not be able to keep. And she was angry. Angry at Vincent. Angry at the injustice. Angry that she had come so close only to fail. She had nothing left to lose. When Tony came closer, Mira threw herself at him. She did not know how to fight. She had no weapon, no advantage, no chance. But she had the desperation of a mother protecting her children, even though these boys were not her own by blood. She clawed at Tony's face, her nails raking through his skin. She bit his hand when he tried to grab her, tasting blood in her mouth. She screamed like someone out of her mind, hoping someone, anyone, would hear. Tony punched her in the face, and Mira fell to the floor, her face numb with pain. But she got up again, hurled a metal bucket at one of the men, dodged another reaching hand, and fought for every second she could steal. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was buying time, for Dominic, for a miracle, for anything at all. But time was running out. Vincent lost patience. He shouted that it was enough, and ordered them to shoot that woman. Tony seized Mira by the hair, yanked her head back, and pressed the gun to her temple. She could feel the cold metal against her skin, could smell gunpowder and sweat. Tony told her he was sorry, little sister, his voice carrying no regret at all. It was just business. The gunshot cracked through the basement like thunder, but Mira felt no pain. She opened her eyes, not even sure when she had shut them, and she saw Tony Russo crumple to the floor beside her, blood spilling from a bullet hole in the center of his chest. She turned her head toward the basement entrance, and she saw him. Dominic stood there like death given a human shape, the pistol in his hand still smoking, his gray eyes colder than anything Mira had ever seen. There was no gentleness left, none of what she had seen in the library, none of the grief he had shared with her, only pure rage, the destructive force of a man who had everything and was watching it be threatened. Marco appeared behind him with a gun in his hand, along with 4 other men Mira did not recognize. They poured into the basement like a flood, and everything happened in a blink. Vincent's 2 enforcers barely had time to move before they went down. Gunfire snapped in rapid bursts. There were screams of pain, bodies hitting concrete. Dominic stepped over the dead as if they did not exist, his eyes never leaving Vincent. Vincent called him little brother, his voice strangely calm even though every man he brought with him was already on the floor. He said he knew Dominic would come. Dominic was always too weak, too emotional. He could not let other people do things for him. Dominic told him to be quiet, his voice low and lethal. He asked if Vincent thought he could touch Dominic's family and live. Vincent slowly reached behind his back and said he was only doing what had to be done for this family. Dominic was too soft to lead. Their father had been wrong to choose him, and Vincent was correcting that mistake. In a movement as fast as lightning, Vincent drew a gun and aimed it at Mira, who was still on the floor and had not even managed to stand. Vincent told Dominic to come closer, his voice cold as ice, or she would die right now. He said he had nothing left to lose. Dominic did not move. His gun stayed trained on Vincent, but he did not fire. The air became thick enough to choke on. Marco and the others held their positions, nobody daring to shift an inch for fear Vincent would shoot. Dominic said Vincent killed his wife, Elena, a woman who had never harmed anyone, killed right in front of Dominic's son. Vincent answered that she knew too much, and she would have destroyed everything Vincent was building. Dominic said, "And now you plan to kill my children, Matteo and Nico, your own blood. They are only children. Vincent, what have they done?" Vincent roared, and the last mask of calm finally fell away. He said they were obstacles, the things standing between him and what belonged to him. Their father chose wrong, and Vincent had to fix it at any cost. Dominic said Vincent was insane. Vincent screamed back that he was the only sane one in this family. He kept the gun on Mira and shouted that Dominic thought he could hold an empire together with weakness, with love and family. This was the Mafia, Dominic. This was blood and power, not a fairy tale. Dominic said Vincent would not walk out of here alive, and Vincent knew it. Vincent shouted that he was Dominic's brother. They had the same father, the same blood. Dominic could not kill his own brother. Dominic answered that his brother had died long ago, from the day Vincent killed Elena, from the day Vincent chose ambition over family. The man standing in front of Dominic was not his brother, only a monster wearing a man's face. Vincent laughed like a madman, his gun hand trembling, and said then they would go to hell together, little brother, and he would drag her down with him. In the instant, Vincent faltered inside his own frenzy. Mira moved. She did not think. She simply obeyed the survival instinct that had kept her alive this long. Her foot snapped up and slammed into Vincent's wrist, hard, and the gun flew from his hand and skittered across the concrete, spinning away. Vincent had not even finished reacting when Dominic pulled the trigger. 1 shot, 2 shots, 3 shots. Each bullet landed like a judgment, a sentence for the crimes Vincent had committed. Vincent Corsetti fell, his black eyes still open, staring up at the ceiling. No calculation left, no ambition left, nothing left at all. Dominic stood over him, gun still aimed at his brother's body, breathing hard. His face was a storm of rage, pain, and relief. Marco came to his side and put a hand on his shoulder without speaking. Mira screamed for the children, dragging herself up and pointing at the industrial freezer door. She said they were in there. Hurry, they were freezing to death. Dominic lunged to the freezer door like a man gone mad, flinging the gun aside and grabbing the padlock. It was thick and solid, impossible to break with bare hands. He shouted for Marco, bolt cutters. His voice panicked for the first time Mira had ever heard it. Marco ran in with the tool, and Dominic snatched it, cutting through the lock in seconds. He yanked the heavy metal door open, and cold air surged out like an icy tide. Inside the freezer, it was pitch black and bitterly cold, the temperature below 0, enough to kill a person in a matter of hours. Mira ran in behind Dominic, and her heart broke when she saw the boys. Matteo and Nico were huddled in the farthest corner, clinging to each other as if it were the only way to keep warm. Their lips were purple, their skin pale as paper, their bodies shaking uncontrollably. Nico was crying without sound, tears frozen on his cheeks, while Matteo held his little brother tight, gray eyes lifted with a fear no 8-year-old should ever have to carry. Matteo whispered the word father through trembling lips. He said he knew his father would come. Dominic collapsed beside them, hands that had killed without blinking now shaking as he gathered both children into his arms. He pulled them against his chest, his large body wrapping around them, trying to pour his own warmth into their bones. He told them he was here. He was here now. They were safe. His voice broke, and Mira witnessed something she never believed she would see. Dominic Corsetti cried. Tears ran down the sharp planes of his face, tears he had held back for 2 years since Elena died. He cried because he had almost lost his sons, cried because of the betrayal of his own brother, cried for everything he had failed to protect. He whispered that he was sorry, kissing each boy's head. He said he should have protected them. He said he was sorry. Nico's small arms looped around his father's neck, sobbing into his shoulder. He told his father he had been so scared. He was afraid of the dark. He was afraid of the cold. He thought he would die like his mother. Dominic held him tighter and told him no, never. He would not lose them, never again. Mira stood there with tears running down her face before she even realized they were there, watching the strongest man she had ever known break apart in front of her. and she could not stand still anymore. She dropped to her knees beside them and wrapped her arms around all three, her own body shaking from the cold and from the flood of feeling inside her. The four of them stayed there in the freezing corner, holding one another as if letting go would mean losing each other forever. Matteo lifted his head and looked at Mira, gray eyes full of tears but with something else inside them, something she had never seen in this boy before. Trust. He whispered that he knew Mira would find them. He knew she would not leave. She had promised. Mira's heart melted. She held him tighter and kissed the top of his head. She told him she had promised, and she would never leave them. Marco appeared at the freezer door with warm blankets and coats. They wrapped the boys up. Dominic carried Nico while Mira guided Matteo out. As they crossed the basement, past the bodies and the blood, Dominic stopped in front of Vincent's corpse. He looked down at his brother for a long time, his face unreadable. Then he turned away without a word. They went upstairs into daylight pouring through the windows. The family's private doctor had been called and was waiting with medical equipment. The boys were wrapped in heated blankets, given warm water, checked from head to toe. They were hypothermic, but not in life-threatening danger. A small miracle in the middle of a nightmare. When the boys were stable and had fallen asleep from exhaustion, Dominic came to Mira. She was standing at the window, looking out at the garden where Vincent had threatened her only days before. Her hands were still shaking, the bruise on her neck still throbbing. Dominic said her name. Mira turned and saw him there, his face worn with fatigue, but his eyes full of something she did not dare name. He told her she had saved his sons' lives. She had faced Vincent alone. She had been drugged. She had been threatened, but she had not given up. She had found them when he was not there. He stepped closer, taking her hands in both of his. He said she saved his sons. She saved him. Mira looked up, and in those gray eyes, she saw their future. Not perfect, not easy, but possible. Mira told him softly she had only done what she had promised. She promised she would not leave. Dominic pulled her into his arms, holding her tight as if he feared she might disappear. And Mira held him back, letting her tears fall freely onto his shoulder. In a darkness filled with blood and death, the four of them had found one another. 6 months later, a white colonial house in Connecticut sat in quiet peace amid a wide garden, far from New York and all the shadows of the past. This was not the Corsetti mansion, with its cold walls and secret-filled corridors. This was a real home, with children's laughter echoing through open windows, with the faint scent of something baking drifting from the kitchen, with late afternoon sunlight stretching long across lush green grass. Dominic kept his promise. He completed the transfer of power to someone he trusted, stepping away from the empire his family had built across generations. It was not easy, it was not clean, and there were nights when he still had to deal with loose ends. But he walked out of it, for his sons, for Mira, for the future he wanted to build. Matteo and Nico went to the public school near the house, something unimaginable for heirs of the Corsetti family. Matteo was still quieter and more guarded than other children, but he had started to make friends, and he had started to laugh more. The nightmares about the night his mother died were still there, but they came less often, and whenever he woke in the night, Mira was there to sing him back to sleep. Nico was as if he had been reborn. The 5-year-old from before was now 6, still carrying his stuffed dinosaur everywhere, but no longer afraid of the dark. He began calling Mira Mom Mira 3 months earlier, on an ordinary morning at breakfast, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Mira cried all day after that, but they were tears of happiness, and Diego, Mira's younger brother, recovered. His final round of chemotherapy ended 2 months earlier, and the doctor declared him cancer-free. Mira did not learn until later that Dominic had quietly paid every cost of treatment, the bills she thought the hospital had waived through some charity program. When she found out, she was furious with him for a full week. Then she held him and cried and thanked him all night long. Diego was out of the hospital now, studying at college in New Haven, and he often came to visit his sister on weekends. He was still not entirely comfortable with Dominic, the man who had once been a Mafia boss, but he was trying. For his sister, for the happiness he saw in her eyes. That afternoon, Mira stood in the kitchen cooking rice with beans using her mother's recipe. She wore a simple floral dress, her hair tied up, her bare feet on warm wooden floors. She heard a car pull into the garage and smiled, continuing to stir the pot of soup on the stove. Dominic walked in, and every time she saw him like this, Mira still felt her heart beat faster. No black suit, no cold stare, only faded jeans, a white t-shirt, and a smile he saved for her alone. He stepped behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and kissed her neck. He asked what smelled so good, the rice or her. Mira laughed and turned in his arms, telling him both. She looked up at the face she loved, the man who had given up an empire for her and for the boys, and she knew it was time to tell him. She took his hand and placed it on her belly, where a small life was growing day by day. She told him softly it had been about 8 weeks, her eyes filling with tears. Dominic went perfectly still, gray eyes widening. He looked down at her stomach, then up at her face, as if he could not believe what he was hearing. He asked if she was pregnant. Mira told him she was. And then Dominic Corsetti, the man who had once made all of New York tremble, dropped to his knees in front of her. He pressed his forehead to her belly, both hands holding her hips, and Mira felt his shoulders shaking. He whispered, choked with emotion, that it was their child. Their child. Mira stroked his hair, tears running down her cheeks, but she was smiling. Their child. Father, Mom, Mira. Nico's voice called from the back door, breaking the moment. He told them to come play with them. Matteo would not kick the soccer ball with him. Dominic stood, wiped his eyes, and tried to pull himself back together. But the smile on his mouth could not be hidden. He took Mira's hand, and together they stepped out into the backyard, where Matteo and Nico were waiting under the golden late-afternoon sun. Nico ran to hug Mira's leg. Matteo stood beside his father holding the ball. The 4 of them, soon to be 5, stood there in the garden, sunlight on smiling faces. The shadows of the past would never vanish completely. There would be nights when Dominic jolted awake from nightmares about his brother. There would be moments when Matteo withdrew into himself because of memories of his mother. There would be times when Mira looked over her shoulder and wondered whether the past might catch up with them. But in this moment, among laughter and sunlight, among held hands and kisses, they had found home, not a home of brick and mortar, but a home inside one another's hearts. And that was everything they needed. This story teaches us that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, and courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act while fear is still there. Mira was only an ordinary servant girl, but she proved that anyone can become a hero when they love someone enough. Family is not always the people who share your blood. Sometimes family is the people who choose to stand together through the storm. If this story touched your heart, please press the like button and share it with the people you love. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss our next moving stories. We truly want to know how you felt about this story. Have you ever met someone like Mira in your life? Do you believe people can change because of love the way Dominic did? Please leave a comment below to share what you feel from the deepest part of your heart. We read every comment, and we deeply appreciate every single one of your thoughts. Thank you for staying with us until the very last minute. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.